The avoidant is not hard to love. They are hard to love. Incorrectly, and there is a difference. The statement that the avoidant is not hard to love, but is hard to love incorrectly, and there is a difference, sounds compassionate and understanding. Sounds like relationship wisdom that reframes difficulty as misunderstanding. Sounds like solution to problem, of why loving avoidant feels impossible when framed correctly reveals path forward. But the statement is trap disguised as insight, is blame disguised as understanding, is demand for self-abandonment, disguised as instruction for loving correctly. The difference it references is not difference between hard and easy, but is difference between loving in ways that preserve yourself and loving in ways that destroy yourself, between maintaining boundaries that protect you and eliminating boundaries that accommodate them, between requiring reciprocity that sustains relationship and accepting non-reciprocity that sustains only their comfort. The loving them incorrectly means loving them in ways that include having needs they should meet, maintaining boundaries they should respect, requiring reciprocity they should provide, holding standards they should satisfy. The loving them correctly means loving them in ways that eliminate your needs so they face no expectations, erase your boundaries so they face no limitations, accept their non-reciprocity so they face no obligations, abandon your standards so they face no accountability. The correctly is code for accommodating patterns that hurt you. The incorrectly is code for maintaining self that prevents patterns from operating freely. The difference is difference between self-abandonment they require and self-preservation they cannot tolerate. Understanding that loving them correctly means destroying yourself reveals statement as another version of blaming person who left for not loving well enough, for not accommodating sufficiently, for not disappearing completely enough to make relationship work with someone whose patterns require partner's disappearance. The statement positions leaving as failure to love correctly rather than as success at protecting yourself from love that required incorrect meant maintaining any self at all. The statement keeps people trying to find correct approach when correct approach is approach that costs you yourself, when finding it means losing yourself, when achieving it means succeeding at self-abandonment. They frame as loving them the way they need to be loved. The truth the statement obscures is that avoidant is hard to love because loving them in ways that do not destroy you activates their terror, because sustaining relationship requires accommodations that constitute self-abandonment, because maintaining connection demands sacrifices that eliminate boundaries and needs and standards that healthy love requires remaining intact. They are not hard to love incorrectly. They are impossible to love correctly, without incorrectly meaning you maintained yourself, and correctly meaning you abandoned yourself to accommodate patterns that feel like love to them. Only when love requires nothing from them, while providing everything to them. Number 1. Loving them correctly means having no needs they might fail to meet, which is not loving correctly, but is self-abandonment. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes having no needs they might fail to meet, suppressing needs so thoroughly that needs do not surface to create expectations they cannot satisfy, managing emotional regulation so completely that needing them for anything becomes unnecessary. The correctly framed as having needs met elsewhere, as being self-sufficient enough that their emotional unavailability does not create gaps, as understanding their limitations well enough that you do not ask for what limitations prevent them from giving. The incorrectly framed as being needy, as having excessive expectations, as not understanding that some people cannot provide what you are asking for and asking anyway is pressuring them unfairly. But having no needs they might fail to meet is not loving correctly, but is self-abandonment disguised as accommodation, is erasing essential humanity disguised as understanding their limitations, is becoming person with no needs disguised as being person who gets needs met elsewhere. Humans have needs for emotional support from partners. Having needs met entirely elsewhere means partner is not actually partner, but is person you spend time with while getting partnership needs met by others. The relationship becomes hollow performance, where you pretend not to need while they pretend to give, where you suppress while they withdraw, where you disappear needs while they avoid meeting needs that no longer visibly exist. The loving them correctly through having no needs also means never expressing hurt when patterns hurt you, because expressing hurt is need for them to acknowledge impact, never requesting change when patterns damage relationship. Because requesting change is need for them to adjust patterns, never requiring reciprocity when they take without giving. Because requiring reciprocity is need for them to match investment. Every need eliminated is piece of self abandoned. Every expectation suppressed is standard lowered. Every requirement removed is boundary erased. The correctly is comprehensive disappearance of needs disguised as mature self-sufficiency. Subscribe to understand why the statement that avoidant is not hard to love, but hard to love incorrectly is trap that frames self-abandonment as correct love and self-preservation as incorrect love. Understanding loving them correctly means having no needs reveals first way. The difference referenced is difference between destroying yourself and preserving yourself, between accommodating patterns fully and maintaining boundaries partially, between being person with no self and being person with self that has needs. The correctly is not path to sustainable relationship, but is path to relationship sustained through your complete accommodation of patterns that prevent actual intimacy while requiring you to act as if intimacy exists through never needing intimacy to actually exist. Number 2, loving them correctly means eliminating boundaries that limit their patterns, which is not loving correctly, but is allowing violation. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes eliminating boundaries that limit their patterns, accepting treatment you would normally protect yourself from, allowing behavior that violates standards you would typically maintain. The correctly framed as understanding their wounds, as accepting their limitations, as not imposing your standards on someone whose capacity does not match standards. The incorrectly framed as being rigid, as having unrealistic expectations about how people should treat you, as not accepting them as they are because boundaries require them to be different than they are. But eliminating boundaries that limit patterns is not loving correctly, but is allowing violation disguised as acceptance, is permitting mistreatment disguised as understanding wounds, is sacrificing self-protection, disguised as loving them as they are. Boundaries exist to protect from treatment that damages you. Eliminating boundaries because someone's patterns require violating boundaries means accepting damage as price of maintaining relationship with someone whose patterns require damaging you. The correctly is removing protections. The incorrectly is maintaining protections. The difference is difference between being violated and being protected. The loving them correctly through eliminating boundaries means accepting withdrawal without protest, because protesting withdrawal is boundary requiring them to stay engaged. Accepting blame without defense because defending yourself is boundary, preventing them from deflecting accountability. Accepting criticism without response because responding is boundary limiting their right to criticize freely. Every boundary eliminated is violation permitted. Every standard removed is mistreatment allowed. Every protection abandoned is harm accepted. The correctly is comprehensive vulnerability to patterns that hurt while framing vulnerability as love rather than as self-destruction. Understanding loving them correctly means eliminating boundaries reveals second-way difference. Referenced is difference between protecting yourself and exposing yourself to harm, between maintaining standards and abandoning standards, between being person with boundaries and being person whose lack of boundaries allows patterns to operate without anything preventing patterns from hurting you as thoroughly as patterns are designed to hurt when nothing stops them. Number 3. Loving them correctly means accepting non-reciprocity as normal, which is not loving correctly, but is settling for one-sided relationship. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes accepting non-reciprocity as normal, expecting to give everything while receiving almost nothing, understanding that love means your investment without their matching investment. The correctly framed as loving without keeping score, as giving freely without expecting return, as understanding different people have different capacities, and theirs is limited. The incorrectly framed as being transactional, as keeping score of who gives what, as not loving them for who they are, but instead demanding they be someone who reciprocates in ways they cannot reciprocate. But accepting non-reciprocity as normal is not loving correctly, but is settling for one-sided relationship disguised as generous love, is depleting yourself disguised as giving freely, is accepting inadequate partnership disguised as understanding limitations. Reciprocity is not keeping score, but is mutual exchange that sustains both people, is balance that prevents one person depleting themselves, filling other person, is fundamental requirement of sustainable relationship, rather than unreasonable expectation that mature love transcends. The correctly is giving until empty. The incorrectly is requiring mutual filling. The loving them correctly through accepting non-reciprocity means providing patience they do not provide you, offering understanding they do not offer you, giving support they do not give you, showing vulnerability they do not show you, making effort they do not make for you. Every acceptance of non-reciprocity is piece of self given to someone who does not give back. Every lowered expectation of reciprocity is standard abandoned about what partnership requires. Every suppression of need for reciprocity is boundary eliminated about what you deserve from person you give everything to. The correctly is one-sided, giving disguised as selfless love. Understanding loving them correctly means accepting non-reciprocity, reveals a third-way difference. Referenced is difference between depleting yourself in one-sided dynamic and maintaining yourself through mutual exchange, between giving everything and receiving almost nothing, versus both people giving and receiving. Between relationship that sustains them, while draining you, versus relationship that sustains both through reciprocal investment. Number 4. Loving them correctly means never triggering their terror, which is not loving correctly, but is managing their emotions for them. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes never triggering their terror, monitoring your behavior to avoid activating their withdrawal, suppressing your needs to prevent their distancing, managing your emotions to avoid their reactivity. The correctly framed as being aware of their triggers, as creating safe space for them, as understanding what activates their defensive patterns and avoiding those activations. The incorrectly framed as triggering them through your needs or your emotions or your expectations, as not being careful enough about what activates them, as being responsible when they withdraw, because you did something that made withdrawal feel necessary to them. But never triggering their terror is not loving correctly, but is managing their emotions for them disguised as creating safety, is suppressing your humanity disguised as awareness, is taking responsibility for their regulation disguised as understanding triggers. Their terror is theirs to manage through therapeutic work addressing wounds that create terror. You're managing terror through never triggering it, enables their avoidance of addressing terror, allows them to stay comfortable in patterns, while you stay uncomfortable. Monitoring yourself constantly creates dynamic where you regulate both yourself and them, while they regulate neither. The loving them correctly through never triggering terror means never expressing needs because needs trigger fear of obligation, never requesting closeness because closeness triggers fear of being trapped, never showing hurt because hurt triggers guilt they cannot tolerate, never requiring reciprocity because reciprocity triggers fear of depletion. Every suppression to avoid triggering is piece of self-managed away. Every monitoring to prevent activation is energy spent regulating them instead of living freely. Every care to avoid triggering is accommodation of terror that should be addressed, not accommodated. The correctly is comprehensive emotional caretaking of their terror. Understanding loving them correctly means never triggering terror. Reveals fourth way difference referenced. Is difference between managing their emotional state and maintaining your emotional authenticity, between suppressing yourself to keep them comfortable and expressing yourself while they manage their responses, between taking responsibility for their regulation and requiring they regulate themselves. Number 5. Loving them correctly means accepting their reality as truth, which is not loving correctly, but is abandoning your reality. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes accepting their reality as truth, agreeing that your needs are excessive when they say needs are too much, acknowledging that your reactions are overreactions when they claim reactions are disproportionate, believing their framing of events when framing contradicts your experience. The correctly framed as seeing from their perspective, as understanding their interpretation, as validating their experience, even when experience differs from yours. The incorrectly framed as imposing your reality, as insisting your version is right, as not accepting that two people can see same situation differently and theirs is equally valid as yours. But accepting their reality as truth is not loving correctly, but is abandoning your reality disguised as seeing their perspective, is gaslighting yourself disguised as validation, is losing trust in your perceptions disguised as understanding theirs. Two realities can exist, but accepting theirs as truth means yours becomes false, means your accurate perception of patterns hurting you becomes inaccurate perception of you being too sensitive, means your reasonable responses become unreasonable overreactions. The correctly is accepting distorted version. The incorrectly is maintaining accurate version. The loving them correctly through accepting their reality means believing you are problem when patterns hurt you, accepting you are too needy when needs are normal, agreeing you are too demanding when standards are reasonable, acknowledging you overreact when reactions are appropriate to their behavior. Every acceptance of their reality is abandonment of your reality. Every agreement with their framing is disagreement with your knowing. Every validation of their version is invalidation of your truth. The correctly is losing yourself in their distortions. Understanding loving them correctly means accepting their reality reveals fifth way difference. Referenced is difference between maintaining your grasp on reality and losing your grasp on reality. Between trusting your perceptions and doubting your perceptions, between knowing what is true and accepting their version that serves their patterns rather than reflecting what actually happens. Number 6, loving them correctly means giving them infinite time to change, which is not loving correctly, but is waiting indefinitely for change that will not come. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes giving them infinite time to change, being patient while they work on patterns at their own pace, understanding that growth takes time and pressuring timeline is counterproductive. The correctly framed as being supportive during their process, as not demanding change happen on your schedule, as trusting they will address patterns when they feel ready. The incorrectly framed as being impatient, as pressuring them unfairly, as not understanding that pushing for change makes defensive people more defensive rather than more motivated. But giving them infinite time to change is not loving correctly, but is waiting indefinitely for change that will not come disguised as patience, is accepting patterns permanently disguised as supporting their process, is sacrificing your timeline disguised as respecting theirs. Infinite time means no time, means never, means accepting that change is not happening, while pretending patience is a virtue, rather than recognizing patience. Past reasonable point is self-abandonment. The correctly is waiting forever. The incorrectly is requiring change happen in time frame that allows you to have life you deserve. The loving them correctly through infinite patience means staying while they do not seek help, waiting while they do not address patterns, hoping while they do not change, believing eventual growth will happen, while growth requires therapeutic work they avoid doing. Every month of infinite patience is month of your life accepting patterns. Every year of waiting is year invested in someone who is not investing in change. Every extension of timeline is postponement of life you deserve, with partner whose patterns do not prevent them from loving you adequately. The correctly is indefinite, waiting for change that never comes. Understanding loving them correctly means infinite patience reveals sixth way difference. Referenced is difference between reasonable patience that allows genuine growth process and indefinite waiting that allows avoidance of growth. between supporting someone actively working on change and supporting someone using your patience as permission to avoid addressing patterns. Number 7. Loving them correctly means loving them as they are, which is not loving correctly, but is accepting relationship will never meet your needs. The instruction to love the avoidant correctly includes loving them as they are, accepting their limitations as permanent rather than as patterns they could address, embracing relationship as it is, rather than hoping relationship could improve. The correctly framed as unconditional love, as accepting person rather than demanding person be different, as loving human being with limitations, rather than loving only potential version who has overcome limitations. The incorrectly framed as loving conditionally, as only accepting them if they change, as not truly loving them, but loving idealized version you wish they were. But loving them as they are is not loving correctly, but is accepting. Relationship will never meet your needs disguised as unconditional love, is settling for inadequate partnership, disguised as accepting limitations, is sacrificing your needs permanently disguised as loving real person rather than fantasy. Loving as they are when as they are means defended and distant and unable to provide intimacy you need means accepting life with someone who cannot meet needs that relationships exist to meet. The correctly is permanent acceptance of inadequacy. The incorrectly is requiring partner capable of meeting needs. The loving them correctly through accepting as they are means accepting will never feel fully loved. Accepting will never have emotional support you need. Accepting will never experience reciprocity. Relationships require. Accepting will spend life giving to someone who cannot give back while pretending giving without receiving is what mature love looks like, rather than recognizing. Giving without receiving is depletion disguised as devotion. Every acceptance of as they are is abandonment of as you need them to be. Every embrace of limitations is relinquishment of standards. Every loving despite inadequacy is settling disguised as unconditional acceptance. Understanding loving them correctly means loving as they are reveals. 7th way difference. Referenced is difference between accepting unchangeable circumstances and accepting changeable patterns. Person refuses to change. Between loving someone whose limitations are inherent and loving someone whose limitations are chosen through refusing therapeutic work that would address limitations. Why? The difference is not between hard and easy, but between self-abandonment and self-preservation. The difference the statement references is not difference between hard to love and easy to love, but is difference between self-abandonment and self-preservation, between loving in ways that destroy you and loving in ways that maintain you, between accommodating patterns fully and maintaining boundaries partially. The loving incorrectly is maintaining yourself. The loving correctly is abandoning yourself. The hard is not about difficulty, but about impossibility of doing both, about mutually exclusive nature of loving them in ways they need to be loved, and loving yourself enough to maintain self. The statement frames difference as technique issue when difference is fundamental compatibility issue, frames problem as your approach, when problem is their patterns, frames solution as loving differently, when solution is them addressing patterns through therapeutic work rather than requiring you to love in ways that accommodate patterns. The correctly is not method you have not yet discovered, but is comprehensive self-abandonment disguised as proper love. The incorrectly is not your failure, but is your self-preservation disguised as inadequate love. Understanding difference is between self-abandonment and self-preservation, rather than between hard and easy reveals. Statement serves patterns by keeping you trying to find right way to love, when right way requires wrong sacrifice. By maintaining hope that loving correctly will work, when loving correctly means destroying yourself. By positioning leaving as failure to love properly, when leaving is success at refusing to love in ways that require self-abandonment as price of their comfort. How? The statement keeps people trapped in impossible pursuit of correct love. The statement keeps people trapped in impossible pursuit of correct love by suggesting correct approach exists waiting to be discovered, by implying current approach is incorrect in ways that could be corrected, by maintaining hope that relationship could work if only you could figure out how to love them, the way they need to be loved. The trap happens through believing solution exists in your changing how you love, rather than recognizing solution requires them changing patterns that make them unable to receive love, that does not require lovers' self-abandonment. The pursuit is impossible because correct love is self-abandonment, because finding it means losing yourself, because achieving it means succeeding at comprehensive accommodation that destroys you while maintaining them. The searching for correct approach keeps you trying different strategies, when all strategies that maintain yourself will be experienced by them as incorrect, because incorrect means anything that does not fully accommodate patterns. You try more patience. They need infinite patience, meaning permanent acceptance. You try better communication. They need no communication of needs, meaning complete suppression. You try deeper understanding. They need understanding that excuses patterns, meaning abandonment of accountability. The statement keeps you trapped by preventing recognition that you are not failing to find correct love, but are refusing to provide self-abandonment they experience as correct love. That relationship is not failing because you love incorrectly, but is failing because they require being loved in ways that constitute loving yourself incorrectly. The trap is believing problem is solvable through your adjustment, when problem is only solvable through their therapeutic work. Addressing patterns that make them require adjustment from partners that amounts to partners disappearing to accommodate them. Understanding statement traps you in impossible pursuit, protects you from continuing pursuit. By recognizing pursuit is impossible, not because you have not yet discovered correct approach, but because correct approach is approach that costs you yourself, and pursuing it means losing yourself in service of relationship with someone who experiences your maintaining yourself as you loving them wrong. Why loving them as they are means accepting. They will never love you as you need. Loving the avoidant as they are means accepting they will never love you as you need, because as they are includes defended and distant and unable to provide emotional intimacy, includes withdrawn and blaming and incapable of sustained vulnerability, includes patterns that prevent them from meeting needs that healthy relationships exist to meet. The accepting them as they are that statement frames as correct. Love is accepting permanent inadequacy, is settling for relationship that will never satisfy, is agreeing to spend life with a partner who cannot partner in ways partnership requires. The as they are is presented as noble acceptance when as they are is actually changeable through therapeutic work they refuse to do, when loving them as they are enables their refusal to become as they could be through addressing patterns, when accepting them as they are communicates that patterns are acceptable rather than patterns being dysfunction, requiring treatment. The loving them, despite their refusal to address patterns, is not unconditional love, but is unconditional acceptance of being hurt by patterns they could address, but choose not to address, because your acceptance removes consequence that might motivate addressing. The never loving you as you need is presented as your needing incorrectly, when your needing is normal human needing for emotional support and reciprocity and intimacy. When your needs not being met is not about needs being excessive, but about their capacity being limited by patterns they maintain rather than address. The as you need is framed as demanding too much, when as you need is as any healthy person needs from intimate partnership, when accepting less than you need is settling rather than mature acceptance, when permanent unsatisfied needs create resentment and depletion regardless of how much you tell yourself. Accepting is loving them properly. Understanding loving them as they are means never being loved. As you need reveals the choice statement presents is choice between accepting permanent inadequacy framed as unconditional love or leaving framed as conditional love. when accurate framing is accepting. Permanent inadequacy is settling. That destroys you over time. While leaving is protecting yourself from relationship that can never meet needs, regardless of how correctly you love someone who is incapable of loving you back correctly, because patterns prevent correct loving. How? The statement frames your self-preservation as your selfishness. The statement frames your self-preservation as your selfishness by positioning your maintaining needs as you being needy, your keeping boundaries as you being rigid, you're requiring reciprocity as you being transactional. You're expecting change as you being demanding. The framing makes self-preservation appear selfish when self-preservation is healthy, makes maintaining yourself seem like refusing to love. When maintaining yourself is requirement for loving without losing yourself, makes protecting yourself look like not accepting them. When protecting yourself is recognizing what accepting them actually costs. The selfishness accusation operates through suggesting. Correct love is selfless when correct love, as defined by statement, is actually self-abandoning. Through framing giving everything as generosity, when giving everything to someone who gives almost nothing back is depletion. Through positioning unconditional acceptance as mature, when unconditional acceptance of patterns that hurt you is self-destruction. The selfishness they accuse you of is actually self-care they experience as rejection, is boundaries they interpret as control, is standards they perceive as judgment when all of it is normal self-protection against patterns that hurt. The framing also suggests their patterns are neutral traits. You should accept selflessly when patterns are dysfunctional behaviors. They should address selflessly. Positions you're leaving as you. Being selfish about your needs when they're refusing to address patterns is them being selfish about maintaining comfort. Makes your self-preservation into character flaw, when their pattern maintenance is actual character flaw. That statement protects through framing your response to patterns as problem, rather than patterns themselves being problem. Understanding statement frames. Self-preservation as selfishness protects you from internalizing that maintaining yourself was selfish, from believing requiring reciprocity was demanding, from accepting that having boundaries was refusing to love them. Your self-preservation was not selfishness, but was health. Your boundaries were not rigidity, but were protection. Your leaving was not giving up, but was refusing to continue giving up yourself to relationship that required your self-abandonment as price of their comfort. What it means that every previous partner also loved them incorrectly, according to this logic. The statements that you loved, the avoidant incorrectly, implies you failed where correct love would have succeeded, implies unique inadequacy in your approach rather than recognizing pattern across their relationships. But every previous partner also loved them incorrectly according to this logic, also failed to find correct approach, also left or was pushed away when loving incorrectly, meaning maintaining any self at all. The pattern across relationships is not pattern of partners failing to love correctly, but is pattern of partners refusing to love in ways that require comprehensive self-abandonment. That statement defines as correct. The previous partners also had needs that made them needy, also maintained boundaries that made them rigid, also required reciprocity that made them transactional, also expected change that made them demanding. The previous partners also discovered that loving correctly meant destroying themselves, also recognized that correct approach was impossible, approach, also chose leaving over continued self-abandonment, disguised as proper love. The consistency across partners is not consistency in partners loving incorrectly, but is consistency in avoidance patterns requiring incorrect love, where incorrect means any love that maintains lover. The pattern reveals problem is not how partners love, but is how avoidant can only accept love that requires partners' self-abandonment, is not partners' inadequacy at loving, but is avoidant inadequacy at being loved without patterns destroying lovers. The multiple relationships ending the same way is evidence patterns are problem, not evidence each partner coincidentally failed to love correctly. The statement obscures pattern by focusing on each individual partner's incorrect love rather than on consistent pattern of avoidant requiring love that destroys partners who provide it. Understanding every previous partner also loved incorrectly reveals you are not uniquely inadequate at loving, but are most recent in series of partners who refuse to completely abandon themselves. Demonstrates leaving is not your individual failure, but is appropriate response pattern of healthy people have to patterns that require unhealthy accommodation. Proves statements framing of correct love is actually description of comprehensive self-abandonment no healthy partner should provide, regardless of framing that makes self-abandonment sound like mature love. Why the statement is relationship advice that sounds wise, but is actually harmful. The statement sounds wise because it reframes difficulty as misunderstanding, because it suggests hope when relationship feels hopeless, because it positions solution as achievable through changed approach rather than through impossible change in partner. But statement is actually harmful because it keeps people accommodating patterns that hurt them, because it maintains hope that enables staying in damaging relationship, because it frames leaving as failure rather than as self-protection, because it positions self-abandonment as correct love rather than as destruction disguised as devotion. The harm operates through keeping people trying to find correct approach when correct approach is comprehensive accommodation, through maintaining relationships that should end because statement suggests ending is failure to love properly, through creating guilt about leaving, because leaving proves you could not love correctly, when loving correctly meant losing yourself completely. The statement keeps people in relationships longer than healthy, accommodating more than sustainable, sacrificing more than reasonable, because statement frames all of it as path to loving them the way they need, rather than as path to losing yourself in service of someone whose patterns prevent them from loving you the way you need. The wise-sounding nature of statement makes harm invisible because statement appears to offer solution when statement actually demands capitulation, seems to provide insight when statement actually obscures reality, looks like relationship wisdom. When statement is actually relationship poison, that keeps people destroying themselves while believing destruction is proper love. The harm is in keeping people trapped through hope, in maintaining relationships through blame, in preventing leaving, through framing leaving as individual failure, rather than as appropriate response to patterns that make relationship unsustainable without comprehensive self-abandonment. Understanding statement is harmful rather than helpful protects you from its trap, prevents its keeping you in relationship that damages you, enables seeing through framing that makes self-abandonment sound like correct love. The statement is not wisdom to apply but is trap to avoid, is not insight to embrace but is blame to reject, is not instruction for better love, but is demand for worse self-treatment, disguised as guidance for proper relationship. The ultimate truth about the avoidant. Being not hard to love, but hard to love, incorrectly. The ultimate truth is that the avoidant is not hard to love, but hard to love incorrectly. And there is a difference, but the difference is not between hard and easy, but between self-abandonment and self-preservation, between loving in ways that destroy you and loving in ways that maintain you, between accommodating patterns and maintaining boundaries. Loving them correctly means having no needs they might fail to meet, which is self-abandonment. Not correct love means eliminating boundaries that limit patterns, which is allowing violation. Not acceptance means accepting non-reciprocity as normal, which is settling. Not generosity means never triggering terror, which is managing their emotions. Not creating safety means accepting their reality as truth, which is abandoning your reality. Not validating theirs means infinite patience, which is indefinite. Waiting. Not supporting growth means loving as they are, which is permanent inadequacy, not unconditional acceptance. The difference referenced is difference between destroying yourself and preserving yourself. The correctly is code for comprehensive accommodation. The incorrectly is code for any self-maintenance. The statement is trap disguised as wisdom, blame disguised as instruction, demand for self-abandonment, disguised as guidance for proper love. The statement keeps people trapped in impossible pursuit of correct love that is actually pursuit of self-abandonment, keeps focus on how you love rather than on whether they address patterns, maintains hope that enables staying when leaving would protect. The statement frames your self-preservation as your selfishness, positions every previous partner as also having loved incorrectly, sounds wise but is actually harmful through keeping people accommodating patterns longer than healthy. Loving them as they are means accepting they will never love you as you need. Loving them correctly means accepting relationship will permanently fail to satisfy. Loving them the way they need means loving yourself the way you should not. You did not love them incorrectly. You loved them while maintaining yourself, which their patterns could not tolerate. You did not fail to find correct approach. You recognized correct approach required incorrect self-abandonment. You did not leave because you could not love them right. You left because loving them right meant abandoning yourself wrong, and you chose yourself over relationship that required choosing them over yourself. The avoidant is not hard to love incorrectly. The avoidant is impossible to love correctly, without correctly meaning destroying yourself to accommodate patterns that feel like love to them, only when love costs you everything while requiring nothing from them. The statement is not insight, but is trap. The difference is not instruction, but is blame. The correct love is not achievement, but is comprehensive self-abandonment. Reject the statement. Reject the framing. Reject the blame. You loved as well as anyone can love someone whose patterns prevent them from receiving love that does not destroy lover. The incorrectly was your self-preservation. The correctly would have been your self-destruction. You chose correctly by choosing yourself. That choice was right, even though statement frames it as loving incorrectly. The statement serves their patterns, not your well-being. The statement protects their comfort, not yourself. The statement enables their avoidance, not your growth. You left because you loved yourself correctly, even if loving yourself correctly meant they experienced it as loving them incorrectly. You protected yourself appropriately, even if protecting yourself meant they experienced it as rejecting them inappropriately. You maintained boundaries healthily, even if maintaining boundaries meant they experienced it as limiting them unhealthily. The correct and incorrect are reversed in statements framing. What statement calls incorrect was actually correct. What statement calls correct was actually incorrect. You loved correctly by refusing to love incorrectly, where incorrectly means self-abandoning. The avoidant is hard to love in any way that preserves you. The avoidant is impossible to love in ways they accept, without those ways destroying you. The statement disguises this truth through framing that suggests technique when reality is incompatibility, through language that implies solution when actuality is impossibility, through words that propose hope when honesty requires recognition. That hope for loving them well, while loving yourself well, is hope for something that cannot exist when they require your self-abandonment as evidence you love them adequately. You were not inadequate. The task was impossible. The statement lied. You chose correctly. Stay free. The person who needed you to love them through self-abandonment will find people willing to abandon themselves and will discover those relationships are unsatisfying because easily broken people are broken for reasons that make them poor partners. You refused to break yourself. That refusal was loving yourself correctly. That refusal meant loving them incorrectly according to their definition, where incorrectly means maintaining any self at all. The incorrectly you are accused of is actually correctly. The correctly you are instructed toward is actually incorrectly. The hard to love incorrectly is actually impossible to love correctly, where correctly means in ways they can receive without patterns requiring your destruction. You discovered this truth. You acted on this truth. You left based on this truth. The statement tries to make you doubt this truth through suggesting you failed to find correct approach when you succeeded at recognizing. Correct approach meant incorrect self-treatment and choosing yourself over approach that required self-abandonment. They call correct love. Trust what you discovered. Trust what you recognized. Trust what you chose. The statement is wrong. You were right. Your leaving was right. Your self-preservation was right. Your refusal to love incorrectly was right. Stay right by staying free.